step by step. Let's talk about the step-by-step process of how to buy REOs and notes. And this is applicable to every single deal you will do, whether or not it was any of those asset classes and whether or not any of those were, if it's a private seller or a bank. But I'm going to tell you the differences when we go through those two things, okay? I am going to talk about both REOs and notes and the process, and I'm going to show you where they're completely similar. I'm going to show you where they're a little different, okay? Because, again, transaction engineer, I want you to be capable and ready and armed to buy any deal that comes across your plate. Because when a deal comes across your plate and it's 20% of the value, or even 50% of the value, you want to know what to do with that deal. All right, so step by step. We already did this. So you're gonna call. Okay, now this is where my my graphic design gets even worse, but it is in your book. So if you have trouble seeing this, never fear, because it's in your book. All right. So first, you're gonna start calling the banks for deals. We are going to talk about how to call banks, how to actually do that later on in this class. Remember the bank list that's in stuff here. The bank list that's in your book, in my home study course. Start referring to that. Start looking for the banks that you want to call. We're going to be talking about how to talk to them. The next thing, the other thing that I want you to do step by step is also be calling brokers. Okay? Calling brokers in your area, in the areas that you've decided on, is going to help you to understand that area, the value of it, and be able to another person to work with. I'm also going to dive deep into where to find these deals in other avenues, but I want to start there. So you're going to call the banks, then you're going to analyze the tape or the deal. You're going to look it over. You're going to take it. Now listen, I want you to put it in the quick calculator that's also in your course, in the software. Once you know it's a deal, then put it into the 5-year analyzer. And make a note on your pad. The most updated version of the 5-year analyzer is on the website, not in your software container anymore, all right? There's also a DVD, 2-hour DVD explanation on how to use that software. And basically, it's right over my shoulder, and I walk you through the whole thing. You can listen to it over and over and over and over and really get the hang of it. There's also a sample deal on there so you can run that through, okay? But the most updated one is on there. So then once you've got it analyzed, once you know it's a deal, and I'm going to go through each one of these steps, so I should just say, you're going to do your due diligence. Do your due diligence on paper first. That's very important. Do your financial due diligence first. Don't visit the property. Don't spend all this time on the property. Don't go in every single unit. I had this one student, he came to me when I first met him, and we did a strategy session, and I sat down with him, and he comes and he's got this 3-ring binder. And he puts it down. He goes, I want you to look at this deal. And he gives it to me, and it was double thickness of this. I mean, it was 3 rings, so mine's probably, this is a pretty meaty manual, I thought, anyway. So he gives it to me, and I look at it, and I turn to the first page, and I'm like, wow, he had so much information. He had broken down everything. It was beautiful. I'm like, oh, I'm going to hire you to do my, my bank. By the way, I don't do much for the bank. I don't put together a whole bank, proposal to them. My mortgage broker does. Eric, who's going to be here tomorrow. He asks me for certain things, but he compiles it and he puts it together, and he even puts together his own stuff that goes in it. So, but anyway, so he hands it to me. He goes, okay. And he looks at his eyes are really wide. I'm like, oh, so how many times have you been to the property? Oh, I've gone there over and over and over and over again. And he tells me he owns 115 houses. So he's an avid investor. And many of those houses he owns free and clear. So he gives me the thing, and I turn to the first page, and I look back up at him, and it took me 30 seconds, really. Now I pretended it took me 10 or even 5 minutes, to know that it was a terrible deal and he couldn't do it. You know what I mean? What a time waster, you know? So use that quick calculator. What that quick calculator is it's my head and Ed's head of how we look at a deal very, very quickly and get it off of our desk. At our mastermind yesterday, someone said, well, what do you do with, how do you file all these deals and figure it out and have the deal dashboard? And, you know, and I know I throw them away. I put them in a little file that says garbage and I keep them, you know, on my desktop. I do keep them, but I put them in a file, and that has a file, the name of the thing, if I ever feel like referencing back to it, which I pretty much never do. Garbage file, you know, and that's how I file my stuff. And the reason why I can do that is, and I'm going to go through these rules that automatically kick these things out to the curb immediately. And then I'm also going to talk about those calculations. But use the quick calculator, because all that is getting in my head and Ed's head of how we throw out deals immediately. Put them in the 5-year analyzer. Okay, so you do your due diligence. You're going to identify your exit strategy, identify your financing or wholesaler, etc. So what happens is I decide, is this a deal? Is this a deal? And the minute I decide that it is, I'm now talking to my mortgage broker and saying, is this a deal that can be financed? Or I'm talking to the bank and saying, you're going to finance this deal, the bank that gives it to me. And by the way, 95% of the time, the bank takes back the financing every time. Okay? But I'm going to be working on my financing at the same time, once I figure out it's a deal. At the same time that I'm figuring out that it's a deal, and I have an LOI or sort of agreed upon price, even if it's verbal, that's when I'll go to the bank and say, that's when I'll start to go to my investors and say, listen, I've got this deal. It's going to be a 16% cash on cash return. That means you get 8%. I'm going to talk about cash on cash return coming up. But it's got basically a 20 to 30 year annualized return for you. It's located in an emerging market, a good one, next to a college. It has no deferred maintenance. It's in excellent shape. It's in a great community. It's, whatever it is that's great about this deal, except for exactly how many units it is and where it's located. Now I can pitch it to my investors and pitch it freely. I can even show them the entire cash flow of it, how it works, where I got my numbers from, as long as I withhold where it's located and how many units it is, and of course the name, you know. So that's when I start putting together the investors, even before I have an LOI in place, because banks take forever, and I can actually raise over half of my funds during that LOI stage, and I can raise half of my funds by the time they get their purchase and sale agreement together. I've waited sometimes 60 days to get a purchase and sale agreement together. Well, just because I don't have a purchase and sale agreement, do you think I'm going to stop the investor process of getting my investors excited about it and getting them on board? No, I'm going to get in my investors as quickly as I possibly can, and I'm going to get them interested in this deal. I do not ask for I get them to sign the accredited investor form, and I do not ask them for any kind of letter of commitment yet. I do not ask for funds in the bank. I don't do any of that yet. Pretty much I've found, and this is not everyone's experience, but I work with investors who like me, know me, trust me, and have known me for a little bit. I have found that they rarely pull out of that commitment. Now, you may find that you have to almost go to, double the amount. But even when I started, I did not find that to be the case. But I know that Dave teaches that. So, I think that other people have had that issue. Where you have that issue is when you have one investor. One investor is actually not always the best thing in the world. And I'll tell you why. When you have multiple investors, 3 investors, 4 investors, that's when you get your real returns. When you have one investor, that one investor usually takes too much of it. So it's great if you can syndicate some of this process. Syndication, by the way, means pooling together investors to buy one deal, basically. And you want it with the least amount of investors possible. Another thing that I require is a $50,000 minimum. Anything smaller than that doesn't work because it's kind of scary and for them. Because if they can't put in $50,000, then they're not the investor for me. I want them to have funds. And most of my investors usually put in $100,000 to $500,000. So that's usually the range. But you won't start off there. You'll probably start off at a whole bunch of 50s. And then someone will come in with like 350. Someone will come in for 200. And by the way, the guy who comes in with 350,000, you put him on the loan. Now you have the sponsor. Now you have all of that. Now, then the investor says, and I've never had this happen either, but I could imagine that it would. I don't want to be on the loan. I don't want to sponsor. If they own over 20% of the property, it's going to be hard to keep them off the loan. So you use that to your advantage. Most people, when they buy real estate, they figure they got to have a mortgage, right? They figure they're going on the loan. So don't tell them they're not until, until it becomes an issue, until they say, oh, I'm not going on that loan. Well, then okay. But their lawyer, their attorney is going to agree with you when you say, well, you own over 20% of it and that thus you actually need to go on the loan. Now you risk the idea that maybe he might say, well, then I'm going to only put in this amount of money. You risk that idea. But again, what I would say to them is, it's going to be a non-recourse loan, But if you need to keep them off the loan, find a creative attorney that can do it, because you can keep them off the loan if you really need to. But then, of course, you're going to be looking for a sponsor. Now, a sponsor, let's talk about that.